Hello, hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. I say see, it's sort of like a blinded by the light situation, but I'm assuming some people are still there. You haven't all left because I'm not doing a Connie Hook style, here's one I made earlier. But maybe we will, I don't know. Let's keep you in suspense. We'll keep you in suspense. Thank you all so much for coming. You will have seen there's some paper on your table. We'll come to it, but do have a look over it for the next kind of couple of minutes. Thank you so much for being here today for our breakout session. We've got the next hour, maybe a little bit less, where we wanted to share a space, really. We wanted to take some time to begin thinking about how we might start reframing youth voice, how we might think about it in a different way. I think something that we aren't always afforded in this industry, or indeed most industries, is that time to sit back and reflect and think about what we might want to improve or what we don't quite like or what's a bit niggling and annoying. And we hope that this is that time and opportunity to kind of reflect and sit and reframe together. But I guess how rude of me, I've fully not introduced myself or the two wonderful women next to me. I'm Julia, she, her, a northern transplant who now lives in the Black Country. As you can see, neither accent has actually managed to permeate or stick with me, just got a sort of solidly boring southern going on. But I happily live there with my two very fluffy cats and a lovely partner, doing nice musical things. With a slightly more professional hat on, I'm here presenting on behalf of Matt Makes Music, Midlands Arts Centre, the lovely art centre opposite the cricket ground in Birmingham, for those in the know. Their inclusive music programme. But I'm moving on to become Director of Music Education at the Music Works in Gloucester. So do come and have a chat after this session, talk about the work, ask us some more questions, or if you just want to see thousands of pictures of my fluffy cats, that can also be arranged. But I'll pass over to Anita now.
Thank you. I'm Anita. I'm a communications practitioner, copywriter and fundraiser based in Monmouth, South East Wales. You can read all about me in the bio, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. If we're on a cat's theme, I have a cat called Ollie, a lovely cat called Ollie. I was going to say a grumpy cat called Ollie and a lovely husband called Davan, but I'm not sure which way around that is. I'm also mum to a 24-year-old who is neurodivergent, and also we adopted her, so she went through many of the challenges that we talk about a lot in music education in terms of young people facing barriers in their learning. So that's what I'm really passionate about. Also, I love live music and theatre. I'm a choir member, community choir member, a very bad piano, flute and guitar player because I don't practice. I live in Monmouth, South East Wales. Over to Imi.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Really great to be here today. I'm Imi, and I co-lead something called the Relationships Project, which I'll tell you a little bit more about shortly. I feel like I have to admit this. I don't have a musical bone in my body, but I am very grateful to be here today with you all and to be inspired by your musicality. And maybe I'll go back and give that failed piano grade 1 another go. I live in Shropshire. I did my stint in London and scuttled back to the country life during the pandemic at the soonest possibility. And controversially, I'm a dog person, not a cat person. So I have a beloved dog called Bramble, who I've only been away from for about 3 hours now, and I already can't wait to get home to. Over to me. Sorry. Yes. While we're kicking off, we would like to invite you to do a very short exercise to get us going and hopefully get us into the kind of mind space that we're going to be exploring a little bit more today. So if you have a look on your tables, you should find a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, you will see an exercise. And this exercise invites you to transport yourself back to your childhoods and to write about an adult who really listened to you. Now, don't worry about the quality of your writing or about any spelling mistakes. No one's going to be marking this. But this is just an opportunity or an invitation to have a think about and reflect on an adult that really listened to you when you were a child. We'll have 2 minutes to do that, and then we will explain throughout the course of the conversation why we have invited you to do this exercise.
So do feel free to chat it through, write it down, whatever's most comfortable for you. Chris, can we have some lovely background music as they do that? You are listening to the musical stylings of Matt Mix Music in this. So it's our inclusive band Switch and the youth justice program that we do. Yeah. If it plays. Ruby, do we have any spares? If anybody needs any spares, lovely Ruby, our glamorous assistant, has made one earlier. There we go, Blue Peter. Haha, Connie.
Okay, thank you everybody for taking part in that exercise, and it'll become clear later on why we've asked you to do that. We're running a little bit late, so we're going to move at pace through all of this. So we're going to be talking a lot more with Imi and with Julia in the next hour, but we wanted to hear from you first, not about what you've just been writing, but we just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and we'll be using Menti. I think you're all familiar with this now because it's been used throughout the conference. So if you could go to menti.com and type in the code that's on the screen. And the first question we'd like to ask is, what does Youth Voice mean to you? Yeah, it's at the top of the slide. We thought about that already. Yeah, so what does Youth Voice mean to you is the first question. So while you're finding the Menti, just wanted to say that, first of all, that I know, although I can't see any of you, I know there are some people in the room who are really real experts in Youth Voice, who have been embedding Youth Voice into their work for many years and who are seen as kind of sector leaders. And so you may be sort of quite comfortable with Youth Voice and feel that you're really understanding what it means for you and for your organisation. But I know that for a lot of us, it can be difficult. It can be hard to know if you're getting it right. And also, we've been doing Youth Voice. That's, the terminologies can be problematic in itself, but we've been doing it for quite a few years now, and maybe it might be time for a new sort of phase of Youth Voice. But in order to sort of explore Youth Voice properly, we'd invite you to be really honest about how you're feeling about that at this stage in your organisational development or your development. So there's no judgment here. None of us are getting it exactly right. And so we're really interested to hear where you are in terms of Youth Voice. So the first question is, what does Youth Voice mean to you? And can we change to the Menti, please, to show the answers that are coming up? And I'd invite you to write your answers quite quickly because we'll be going through these questions quite quickly. So if you have any thoughts, please pop them in the Menti as soon as you can. Can we swap to the Menti to display Brilliant, thank you.
Ooh.
Can we see these properly? Right, okay, thank you. A lot of answers here already. So listening, collaboration, grateful, empowerment. They're moving along at pace, ownership. Pizza.
More than pizza.
More than
is
pizza.
what I
Yeah,
love.
absolutely. That's a bit of a cliche.
I had a
isn't it?
conversation with somebody about this the other day, and I said, what do you think about youth voice? What does it mean to you? And they were like, it's like, you know, when you start a new job and you have a conversation with someone at a water cooler and they tell you their name, and then 4 years later you're leaving that job and you realize you never got their name right and you've just been calling them Love forever or something slightly wrong in an approximation. That's how they feel about youth voice, that they sort of knew it was there, they understood at some point, they thought they did, but they weren't quite sure, which I kind of loved. But I love More Than Pizza as well.
So, yeah, some really fantastic words there, really interesting language that we're all really, really used to. So the next question, if we can move back to the questions again. The next question is, how able are you in your day-to-day work to listen to young people and act on what they share? So that's you in your day-to-day work rather than your organisation. And if we can swap to the Menti again, please. Brilliant, thank you.
I kind of like watching them come in
Hey,
live,
interesting.
like it's
Ooh.
a race.
Right, okay. So there doesn't seem to be anybody who feels that they're never able, which is brilliant. Very able. Some occasionally able. So we're head to head really on
We're
all those
really
categories.
close.
Interesting.
Oh,
Still more coming
go
in.
on, somebody vote for that. No, don't do it. I'm not swaying your opinions. I'm not leading the witness. That's super interesting.
Interesting, okay. And then moving on to the next question, the final question on Menti. How able is your organisation in its strategies and policies to make change for, with and by young people? And can we move back to the Menti again? Final time back to the Menti, please. Thank you. Okay, so bigger differences here so far. So, yeah, definitely some room for improvement there. I think we probably just settled on, yeah, majority sometimes able. Interesting, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking part in that. It's really good to get your voices heard in this room a little bit as well. And thank you so much for the technology gods, namely Chris over there, for making that all work. Really appreciate it. When we were talking this through and planning it, I had to do an A, B, and C option for what I said next about, oh, well, clearly you all hate youth voice, or clearly you all know everything about it. That's great, hooray. And the one that when we discussed it, I think we thought the most likely thing will be that it will be a really mixed response, that there will be some people who are really confident, some people who have a lot of sway within their organisations and feel like they can really genuinely embed youth voice in a meaningful way, some people who are confused at the water cooler about their colleague that they've known for 4 years. So I think this is kind of what we expected. And perhaps, can I posit that it showcases the need for clarity in this area, that it's become a buzzy, fuzzy word that we know is bandied around by funders, it's understood by funders, it's something that we know is understood of us. And indeed, we know the importance as a sector, as organisations, as facilitators, in championing youth voice, in championing young people's thoughts and opinions and preferences. There's a real urgency and need for that. But perhaps the only recent practical application advice is still quite small. Perhaps it's something that we're finding quite difficult to do more than just moving with the times. And I know that there is also weighing up that pressure of we live within an existing system, right? We have reporting pressures, we have funding guidelines, we have expectations, as well as our own lived experience of this is what we know from our teaching. These are the things that we hold important, the preferences that we have, the types of music we like, the instruments we like. In fact, can I even say the trauma you might hold to do with your education system and teaching? So actually balancing those two things up, the need versus the difficulties and the challenges, I think that we saw that there was a definite challenge and opportunity here for some clarity. We've been pondering these things. Matt makes music. I'm very good at pondering. I love a ponder. And I think this was something that not understanding the kind of core of something and it just being thrown off as a buzzword was something that we really wanted to interrogate further. Now, there were two turning points for us, which are kind of the basis of the report that you've all got in front of you. And if you don't have one, please do shout and we'll give you one to go away with. The Beyond Youth Voice report and our kind of talk here today. The first of which was talking to young people who were disruptors in different areas, different countries, whether that might be climate change, whether it might be social justice or the water, sanitation and hygiene space, but knowing that they were people who we could learn from their experience and their perception of music education as well. And the second kind of turning point was coming across the relationship project. So I won't talk too much about that because we've got lovely Imi here who will talk more on that. But kind of thinking about how we might reframe youth voice so it is genuinely embedded in our day-to-day practice and not something that's just that we visit occasionally or as a tick box for funders was something that was really, really important for us. And I think Connie talked about it quite a lot in what she just said about how changing systems takes time, but actually we've come a long way. We've come a long way with EDR, we've come a long way with sustainability, and this is just another facet of something that if we begin to embed, it can have real transformative results. So before we delve a little deeper with a discussion that Anita's going to chair, we have a lovely video from Shomi, who is the main researcher for the report that you have in front of you. She can't be here today because she's off being a rock star, probably somewhere amazing, doing something. Like, she came on a call once and with me and Anita, and she was like, oh, I was just talking to Biden. And we were like, all right, okay, fine. But she sent us a lovely video today. So hopefully that will play.
Hi, I'm Shomi Hassan Chaudhary, a water, sanitation and hygiene activist, originally from Bangladesh, but working worldwide with policymakers and organizations like the UN, Awareness 360, and the Diana Award. Last year, on behalf of Mac Makes Music, I had the incredible privilege to talk to 12 fellow activists from places like the United States, Canada, Tanzania, Japan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Latvia, Fiji, and Hong Kong to get fresh perspectives on music education and how young people might bring about change. The recurring theme that came up from all these conversations and fellow activists was the importance of music in their lives and concurrently the importance of listening to young people and empowering them to create the change they want to see in the world and to protect and further what it is that is important to them. I'm really sorry that I can't be with you there today, but I wish you all the best in looking beyond Youth Voice to work with young people in addressing the opportunities and challenges you face. Have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was Shomi, who we worked with at the kind of really starting point of this report, and what emerged from it was a combination of Shomi's insights from international activists, from youth activists from across the world, as well as our insights from working with Imi and the Relationships Project. So now I'd like you to really use your imaginations and to believe that Julia and Imi are sat on a lovely sofa, and probably stretch your imagination a little bit further and imagine that I'm a professional interviewer, maybe Oprah, perhaps Graham Norton, probably more like Mrs. Merton. But this is the kind of Q&A on the couch section of our session. So I'm going to ask Julia and Imi a few questions about the Relationships Project and the Beyond Youth Voice report before handing over to you for questions. So to start off with Julia, can you tell us about how this report came about and what you hope to achieve with it? What is it and what isn't it, perhaps?
So, honestly, I think the report came about because of conversations that we were having and some frustrations that I've already alluded to about things becoming buzzy or fuzzy or tick boxy or just informing strategies in a tokenistic way. And I know that's a word that I don't want to bandy about because I think there is a lot of really, really great practice going on in this area. But I think for me also, I was coming from the space in Matt Makes Music that was about championing inclusion. It was about putting inclusion at the heart of music education, the arts, and society more generally. So I think there was this opportunity, as there is with EDI, to interrogate it, to keep saying it's never a job that's done. You've never completed EDI, you've never completed Youth Voice. It's a evolving journey. And I think there was a real opportunity here. I kind of alluded to already that idea that there was a challenge. There's a challenge here about people feeling not listened to and people feeling siloed, but at the same time there was an opportunity to really interrogate that further and reframe it. Also from that inclusive angle, for me there was an element that, I know it's just terminology and I know it's perhaps me being a bit pernickety, but the terminology around Youth Voice already erases the ideas and opinions of non-verbal young people, for example, or those young people who choose to communicate differently. And certainly it can often become that echo chamber of, we talk to the people that we're already engaged with. So I think there was an opportunity here to, I said it already, but interrogate that further. I've got a friend who's a secondary maths teacher, and I was telling him a bit about this, and I was saying, well, how do you go into settings and as a teacher? What's the biggest piece of advice that you would give? And he said, look, just be prepared that with anything that you're teaching to other people, you've got to answer, but why though? But why though? 5 times. And if you can do that with a group of kids, if you're teaching them something and they say, but why? And you have an answer, and they'll go, but why? And you have an answer, but why? If you can do that 5 times, then you've got something that's really sturdy. And I felt like with Youth Voice and obviously the strategies that came with it, even from funders and from the highest levels of reporting, there was still something that felt that we couldn't answer that question to that many times. So I think turning this less into finger pointing, less into, certainly for people on the front line who have got responsibilities and targets and attainment, how can we make it something that is a conversation that's based around, let's reframe this together, a space to reflect, let's genuinely, for the sustainability of our sector, how can we reframe this in a different way? So the second part of your question was, what is this and what isn't this? I think this is just the beginning of some research. It's looking at international perspectives of what Youth Voice might look like, what youth disruption looks like. It's not a manifesto, it's not a white paper, and it's not, I'm afraid, a toolkit. There isn't something in that report that you can take away and just go, this is our Youth Voice strategy now. And I understand that that's sometimes frustrating, but I think with something like that, with that step change that Connie was alluding to, there isn't a TikTok life hack video for it. It's something that we genuinely have to look at from different angles and invite different conversations and viewpoints into it to make that change. So hopefully this is the seed. This is, to use a nice gardening, I'm not green-fingered at all, but this is the seed of an idea. It's a space to think about it. And I hope you will propagate that and take that into your own spaces and water it yourselves and look after it. But that's all it is at this point.
And it started with a conversation and a few conversations between myself and Julia, and I have been working in international development for about 12 years alongside my music education work, and I started to hear a lot of talk about systems change and systems leadership. And I'd worked with Show Me, and it just felt like there was some kind of coming together of this. How can we make real change with, for, and by young people? And I knew that Show Me and her colleagues were such experienced activists now that surely they'd have some perspectives on this. So that's when we kind of brought Show Me in and asked her how she'd approach this, and we just left it to a really open brief for her, because we didn't want to dictate anything. We didn't want to say, we're asking you to be a consultant to solve a problem. We just wanted to bring some fresh perspectives to our thinking. And so can you tell me, Julia, about some of the things that you heard from those young people that Show Me spoke with in that report, and what resonated most strongly for you?
Yeah. I loved talking to Show Me and seeing the conversations in real time. She spoke to 12 international activists, like I said, across loads of different areas, and having their insight both into how positive disruption, what that looked like, what the likely barriers were that young people faced when getting their ideas across or making change happen, was so insightful and so interesting. And also, she talked to them a lot about music education. And I think something that will not be a surprise to any of you was the importance they all put on music, how important it was in her life. In the wider report, Show Me told us a really heartbreaking story about why music was important for her in the relationship with her mother. So it became something that we could see how emotive it was. I know I don't need to tell you, all of you, but that was something that, you know, it resonated a lot because it was incredibly powerful. There were a lot of other things that I think you would expect. You know, the theme of funding being an issue came up time and time again. The theme of it being, music being something that was decentralized, both in terms of perceived importance, next to other curricular subjects, for example, but also in terms of building social skills. Something they relayed was that there was a perceived unimportance to music in that vein too. And I think the other thing that you won't find surprising is that they put a lot of store by partnership working, not just partnership working, you know, meaningful partnership working within the sector, so deepening actual partners. I think they pointed a lot to partnerships not looking like an awkward power dynamic where one side has all the money, tells them what to do, and that's a partnership. That's not a partnership. So I think they were very clear that partnerships had to be something that was collaborative and two-way and conversational. And that theme went for, you know, within a sector. So for us, that might look like our partnerships with schools or with music services or with arts organizations. But it also looked like wider partnerships. Who's not got a seat at the table and why? If you look around, what's not being represented and what's the reason? And can we share that power in a more authentic way? But also cross-sector. You know, it was really insightful, as I said, to have these viewpoints from water, sanitation and hygiene, from climate change, from social justice, and seeing how actually a lot of the themes are similar, and then some of the answers are entirely different, and what can we learn from that? The two themes that really chimed and resonated, though, with me were the need to, I guess, embrace this widest, most delicious smorgasbord of musical ideas and genres and types and experiences and approaches, and have creativity and fun. It came, literally every young person talked about it, that the opportunity, and again, Connie alluded to it, the idea that you can have music from your heritage or music from your culture, music from outside, and learn in that way, or music delivered in different ways. And that's the fun part, right? That they all got very, very excited about, to celebrate and share that music is an exchange rather than a download from a source of knowledge to a source of less knowledge. And I think the second theme that really resonated, you've already picked up on, was teased out by Show Me, who does this a lot in her own work, and there's a case study in our report about this, but she looks a lot at systems changed. She looks a lot at how we change those complex systems that have been about and grown, like the NHS or climate change or social justice, those things where it's like, how do we actually change these things? And looking at systems leadership, the idea that actually we need the diversity of contributors to a system or to a sector. We need all those different viewpoints, and we need to empower those who have currently not been empowered in that. And how do you do that? Show Me at least posits that is done by really positive relationship building, sharing of power, sharing of responsibility, sharing of that kind of systems leadership. So those were the things that felt really, I don't know, meaningful and resonated a lot.
Thank you, Julia. And so what, at the time that we were working with Show Me, around the time we were working with Show Me, we happened to come across the Relationships Project. And a lot of the work that they were doing seemed to perfectly tie in with the kind of findings of the report, not necessarily what young people were saying overtly, but what we were kind of thinking about in terms of systems change. So Imi, I wanted to come to you, and I wonder if you can simply tell us a little bit about the Relationships Project, what it does and how it came to be.
Absolutely. We set up the Relationships Project 6 or 7 years ago to really shine a light on the importance of relationships across our organisations and systems and communities. So taking a really, really wide lens and a kind of a real belief in the breadth of the church of relationships. And the origin story really lies with my colleague David, who has been a community development worker in East London for the past 40 or 50 years. And David reflects that no matter who he was working alongside and what the presenting problem was, whether it was a young person struggling at school, a family struggling to keep food on the table, a young person coming out of prison, whatever the problem was, when they sat down and unpeeled the onion together, what they saw were a breakdown of meaningful relationships or an absence of meaningful relationships in that person or that family's lives. And that a big part of the solution, however it was wrapped up in project or policy terms, lay in helping that family or that individual to rebuild those warm webs of supportive relationships that we all need to have a happy, healthy, and flourishing life. Now, I appreciate that most of you in the room today won't consider yourselves social workers or community workers, but I don't think that that matters. At the Relationships Project, we really believe that everything works better when relationships work well, that good relationships are a sort of general theory of everything, but that we've lost sight of that somewhat as a society. So to give you a few examples, there's really great evidence to show that communities recover faster and better from natural disasters when relationships are good. Crime goes down and recidivism rates plummet when offenders have strong and supportive webs of relationships waiting for them on the outside. And educational outcomes improve, attendance rates go up, and staff retention rates also increase quite significantly. And to give a few more sort of hard statistics in case you're not convinced already, I'll go to healthcare where there's really good evidence base has been built up. So 2 examples from healthcare. Researchers at Cambridge University recently found that a time to a patient's next visit increases by 18% when the patient sees a doctor that they've seen before. So if they're seeing a doctor that they already have a relationship with, they feel more heard, they feel more listened to, they feel more supported, and therefore they don't feel they have to come back for support as quickly. In a similar sort of vein, 2 researchers, Tresiak and Mazzarelli, found that when healthcare providers demonstrate compassion, medication adherence increases by up to 80%, and healthcare spending reduces by over 50%. So just a little bit of compassion really helps us to get more involved and more invested in our own healthcare and ultimately saves the system money. So whilst music education, not healthcare, is clearly your remit, I don't think it's a huge leap to think that the core truths of these findings are transferable to the music education work. And I want you to think back quickly to the exercise that you did at the beginning of the session. How many of you wrote about a teacher who shaped your life in some way? When I was reflecting on that exercise, I was thinking about my geography teacher, who I felt really seen and understood by, and who encouraged me to apply to university when I really doubted myself. And I think that shows, and hopefully as you are reflecting on that exercise, that shows that good relationships really do matter. They're the agent of change that lead us to all other outcomes. And the last thing I want to say, because I know we're a bit short on time to this point, is that I know that talking about relationships in the education sector can feel a little bit tricky, a little bit sensitive. Our minds might leap to safeguarding concerns. But I want to just stress that having good relationships doesn't just mean being friends, or doesn't necessarily mean being friends. That geography teacher that I wrote about and that I thought about didn't become my friend. He didn't breach any ethical guidelines. Instead, he had an appropriate boundaried relationship with me in which he was still able to listen to me, still able to understand me, and still able to really understand my needs and address my needs, and really saw me for who I was. He built a relationship with me, and that relationship, whilst it only lasted a few years, really went on to shape my life. So, key message from the Relationships Project: relationships really matter.
So we've been hinting that relationship-centred practice could be a way to better embed youth voice in music education at this sort of stage we're at in terms of the development of youth voice. But I guess there's a lot of questions that will be swimming around in your minds, like, don't we already do relationships? Isn't that what being a music teacher is all about? For goodness sake, we're experts in this stuff. And also, don't we already know how to do relationships with partners as well? So what exactly do we mean by relationship-centred practice at both a personal level and an organisational level?
And a personal sort of fear of mine is that relationship-centred practice, it's a term that we've put out and offered to the field. A fear of mine is that it becomes one of those buzzy, fuzzy words. But actually, relationship-centred practice is really, really simple. It's just about putting relationships first. It's about seeing relationships as a first-order goal, as the agent of change, as the means by which all other outcomes are realised. Not as a fuzzy, fluffy, nice to have that the sort of extroverts do because it's suited to their personality. But it's the systematic prioritization of relationships across our organizations and across our systems. So for some of us, this might seem like common sense, but I really don't think that it's common practice. Over the last half decade or more, I think we've seen the systematic deprioritization and stripping away of relationships from so many aspects of our lives, including perhaps our education systems. And as I say, relationship-centred practice isn't just about nice people being nice to one another. It is about something that is more systematic, more intentional than that, and does have to happen not just at a personal level, but at a systematic level. So relationship-centred practice to us means investing in the knowledge and skills of relationship building throughout our life course, starting from when we're really young, but running right through our continuous professional development. So it's about making sure that we all have the skills to do things like having difficult conversations in constructive and empathetic ways. It's about being able to set and maintain those appropriate boundaries, and about being aware of trauma and being able to respond to it, and many more kind of skills beyond. And it's also about putting the conditions in place that enable relational ways of working to become embedded, to become sustainable, and to ensure that those who are practicing relationality have the support that they need to do so in a sustainable way. So this involves, I think, questioning some of the assumptions that have become embedded in our ways of working and removing obstacles that we have designed into our systems and into our organizations. So it's about challenging ingrained beliefs about, for example, the idea that teachers shouldn't build relationships with students because that's inappropriate. It's about developing safeguarding policies that keep us all safe, but also enable us to work relationally and express our innate humanity. And it's about rethinking what and how we measure and what we prioritize in the work that we do. It's not about measuring what's easiest to measure, but it's about measuring what really, really matters and what's going to lead us to the outcomes that really matter. And I wonder, sort of a rhetorical question to pose to you all here today, I wonder how many barriers you here in the room experience when it comes to trying to put relationships first in your practice, and how those barriers might be navigated or overcome. And would love to speak to any of you after the session about what those are and how they could be navigated.
Thanks, Imi. So you're probably recognising that a lot of you are already doing relationship-based practice, but it's kind of about prioritising that and also sort of thinking about it in a systematic way. So I'm really curious to hear about other examples of relational practice in music education. I think you've got an example, Julia, that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I'll try and do a sped up version, because we've also got a contribution from a wonderful young musician and activist, Elizabeth J. Birch, as well. So I'll share that with you. But I wanted to kind of, talk about where this inspiration had come from in our own music practice and within Matt Makes Music. And a bit of a personal story for me, really, is that it came from a lot of the inspiration or wanting to do this came from my nephew, who is my favorite person in the world. You know, he's great. He's bright in every sense. He's interested and interesting, and he wants to learn and he wants to be part of things. and he's so much fun. But he has not been engaged in school for about 2 years. He is literally sat in the corridor eating jam sandwiches, which, although it sounds kind of fun, I can attest is just been incredibly lonely and incredibly sad, because he was diagnosed autistic, ADHD, with really complex demand avoidant profile. He spends a lot of his life on his own, with people not understanding him and feeling very isolated. And he's now in a school that better suits his needs, and the shift in the education style has been so profound and had such a profound impact. And don't get me wrong, it's never going to be plain sailing. I still get calls from my sister on a daily basis where she's in tears. But I think that the impact that we've seen on him, the friends that he's managed to make, because the teachers cared, because the people around him in the system allowed people to care. They cared about him as a person and his interests. Instead of, it became trusted adults that could have a dialogue with him as a young person. So instead of it being sit down, learn this, be quiet, and him having an absolute meltdown and then sitting in with his sandwich in the corridor, they taught him physics through Zelda. They taught him history through Age of Empires, and they taught him maths through Pokemon. You can see the theme emerging here. But he honestly is so much happier and so much more engaged and goes to school now. And I think that way of being, that they have that relationship, they understand what he likes, they understand what he cares about, and he feels seen, heard, and it's reciprocal. They now share that learning together. And with that kind of experience and that emotive involvement, I approached Liz, the musician who we'll hear from in a second, with these reflections. And I was like, how can we do this in a music session? How can we meet young people where they're at? And we work with this charity that's up the road from MAC. It's Resources for Autism. They're literally up the road. And we worked with the young people and said, what are you interested in? How can we meet you where you're at? How can it be that we find out about what you like? How can it be a boundaried relationship, but one where we've created this network and enabled them to do that too? That the whole session, the only outcome that we had was that we wanted them to build relationships and have fun. That was it. That's all that we said. And the happy byproducts of it was that they learned some quite complex musical skills for their age. They learned about ostinato rhythms and dissonance and harmony, call and response. But that was a byproduct. We also did youth voice, as it were. We built in some questions that we wanted to know to help design our service and our activity strategy. And that was built into the sessions as well. But it was a happy byproduct, not the actual outcome. And that was the reason why it was so successful.
And the mechanism was through Dungeons and Dragons, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
sorry, yeah. So they decided it, and they decided they wanted to do role-play gaming. They wanted to do Dungeons and Dragons, so they could imagine a world without constraints. They could imagine everything. We couldn't tell them no, because they would just, I don't know, decide something completely different. And I had a call from one of the parents, actually, about a month ago, who said that it was the first time that her son had made friends. It was the first time he had ever made friends, and that they still game together to this. So it was over a year ago that this first session happened. They still game together, they still dream together, and they still play music together a year later. All because we prioritized relationships in what we were doing, and that was the only outcome that we asked for. And I think, it was the most powerful way of seeing that in person. But as I said, Liz, we've got a lovely video from Liz Birch, who can speak a bit more on that and give a few more examples in the music space.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Imi. Thank you, Julia. And over to Julia for the video.
Is my mic? Are you on? Okay. Is that in the... That's not in the centre, is it? How am I supposed to keep my professional persona up with this? Hi. Hello. Hi. Hi. Oh, I'm still going. So. I'm so cripplingly awkward all the time. It's my last take. It only focused on the octopus here, which, I probably wouldn't have been that mad at, but, so, well, I'm Elizabeth. Ow. My name is Elizabeth J. Birch. I'm 22 and I'm a music artist. I'm also a community musician who focuses around songwriting, technology, inclusivity and youth voice. I try really hard in my practice to put youth voice at the centre of everything I do. Creating relationships with young people is paramount to help them develop and grow as people on their journeys. I like to think of it a little bit like a house. I see that a lot of people consider music education to be entirely focused on musical skills and objectives. Music is the foundation, music is the first room we visit. Maybe we'll dabble in life skills in the second room we visit, but mainly we'll focus on musical skills. And then to top it all off and box it all in, we're gonna put some musical skills on top in the roof. And then youth voice is kind of popped in the shed for when the funders require us to do it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is bad, but I find that this approach is unsustainable. I propose that the foundation of the Music Education House is actually youth voice. I believe that the first room we should visit is life skills, things that they're actually going to take into their future life and into their journey with them. And then the second room that we visit is musical skills. If we have youth voice as the foundation of our house, it means that everything else is structured, everything else is sturdy, because the young person is going to be fully invested and fully engaged with everything you're doing. And also, you're going to have way more fun. So I just wanted to share some examples of ways that this has worked in my sessions, how it's benefited me, but also mainly how it's benefited the young people. In a long-term inclusive project, there was a young person who didn't really engage with music making much, and when they did, it was quite short-lived. They wouldn't look me in the eye and they wouldn't have conversation with me apart from very limited topics. But I did notice that this young person was very tactile, so I decided to one day bring in Lego. Now, I know it sounds really random, but there was another young person in that same session who really loved Lego, and I thought we could be creative, have some good conversations, and most of all, it would be really fun. I didn't necessarily think that we were going to make music with the Lego or use it for any musical skills or objectives. I was hoping that they would engage more with the session if they had something to fiddle with. To my surprise, it was probably the most engaged I've ever seen that young person in a session. Not only did they speak more, but we actually ended up recording the Lego and putting it in the song that we were writing, which you should be able to hear now if editing Liz has done this correctly. In the following sessions, they actually began making eye contact. They started using my name to get my attention. And they also even sang in songs that we wrote and played instruments and performed live on stage, something that they never did before. Another example is there was a young person in a session who was showing fairly challenging behaviour. They wouldn't engage in any of the activities, they blatantly refused to participate, they wouldn't respect the instruments, and half the time they would throw them across the room or blow trumpets in the other kids' faces. And most of the time they didn't really want to speak to me, they wanted to shout at me or something else, which is completely fair enough, that's fine. And they had a lot of energy, so I thought there must be a way that we can use this energy. So that's when I assigned them the role of sound engineer, somebody who's responsible for setting up the microphone for the other participants, hitting the record button when it's time, and looking after all the technology. This meant I got to know the young person better, they got to know me better, but also it developed a sense of trust because I was trusting them to look after an expensive microphone and to place it in the right place, or to press record and stop recording at the right place. From then on, they were so much more actively engaged in the sessions, even to the point of initiating, talking to me about how the laptop worked, or asking if they could record certain instruments. All of this is to say that objectives shouldn't be the main focus of sessions at all. In fact, young people should be the focus of sessions. By forming meaningful relationships with young people, it means that we give them an opportunity to thrive, not just survive in our sessions. After all, what young person wants to come into a predetermined session and have to engage in it and have to fit into it, when in reality the session should always fit around the young person? I have so much more I could say. I could waffle about this for a very long time, and I have way more examples, but I was given 2 minutes, and I'm pretty sure this is not 2 minutes. I'm really sorry, Julia. But I hope you have a great rest of your day, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye. Oh, I'm coming back round. I shouldn't have done this on a spinny chair.
Thank you, Liz. And I think she's a young person that came through the Mac Makes Music project, isn't she?
Yeah, she did. And she's
Yeah.
still 22, so she's still a young
Yeah.
person.
Brilliant. So it's 3 o'clock now, and we should really be ending. I've asked Yusuf's permission if we can go on for 5 minutes. But if you're desperate for a cup of tea, we won't judge you if you want to go have your tea. But we hope you won't, because we're going to hand over to you now for some questions. I appreciate there's a lot to digest in this, and you won't all have read the report yet because we only brought it today. But does anybody have any questions? Who would like to start with a question?
Any questions?
Questions?
Hello, I just wonder how a facilitator or a practitioner can put this into practice, because it sounds very good, but on a delivery level, do you have any advice of how we can do this on a practical level?
Julia? would you
Well,
like to start?
yeah, and I'll maybe pass over to Imi as well for any specifics to do with relationship-centered practice in practice, as it were. But I think there's a wider thing here that you're totally right, that it might be something where you lack confidence. And I think, as Anita said, I think people are doing this a lot already. I think some of it is to do with the plannings of your sessions, of your projects, that the outcome should be the relationships, and should be those meaningful mechanisms to amplify young people's voices and to care about what they want, and to see them as genuine people. So I think it's more in that project or session planning stage, and then facilitating those relationships, which I'm sure actually the people on the front line are usually really great at. It's a real positive part of a job of working in music sessions. And I recognise that there's a wider question here, and I know we have some funders in the room, and certainly some funders and some policy writers here at this conference, that it's about us advocating for a change in how we report things, that perhaps doing things in a just kind of numbers-based way, where we're just saying this number of children did this thing, this many people attained grade whatever on this, isn't centering relationships, and does then make it harder for practitioners who just need to reach goals that aren't relationship centered. So I would say that there is a wider movement where we all need to advocate for the way that we evaluate and report to be different, and put those pressures to higher bodies who are telling us to do youth voice. So those kind of mechanisms need to change with that expectation, I think. But as for that day to day, I think it's down to the planning of the session and how you structure what you want out of it. You know, I think sometimes we concentrate so much on set outcomes, and actually those holistic outcomes, or as Imi said, just centering relationships as the outcome can be the answer. Do you want to add anything? Or
Just something to add. I think a lot of this starts with really connecting, and this does sound really cheesy, so do excuse me, but I do think it's important, which is it's about connecting to ourselves and understanding what relationality means to us and what version of relationship building works for us. You know, I was watching Liz's video there feeling entirely intimidated, because they're clearly incredibly good at building relationships with young people and have a very kind of creative way of doing that. Not all of us are going to feel we are able to build relationships in that same way. So I think it's about understanding what version of relationship building works for us, and connecting the work that we do to our kind of deepest held beliefs. You know, why did we come into this work in the first place? Understanding what motivates us and translating that into a version of relationship building that works for us and the people around us. And finally, making sure we have the support and the inspiration that we need around us to do that work well and to do that sustainably. So connecting with others in similar spaces to understand some of the brilliant sort of ways in which they are going about building relationships with their young people, their commissioners, their partners, and remembering that it's not just about relationships with young people, but building relationships with others can help us to in all walks of our work.
Thank you, Imi. Any other questions? Over there, Yusuf. Let's see who that is. Ellen. Oh, hi, Ellen.
It's coming, Ellen. Might have to be the
Lovely
last
to have a question from you.
I think it's really, really great what you're talking about. I was wondering specifically how we might use music as a method of building relationships, especially perhaps for students or young people who don't use verbal communication as their main method.
oh, I love this. We should chat more after, because you know, that thing that I said right at the start, for me, the fact that music, and it comes through in the report that all of the international activists said music is that wordless way of communicating, that way of us bonding through song or through rhythms or through making music together. So I think, yes, exactly. And this is, I guess what Imi was alluding to, that there is now this whole pool for us to dive into where we're going, actually, if we're just centering relationships in what we're doing, what does that mean? What can we do? What does the musical output look like? What is the mechanism, the musical mechanism? Is it musical Dungeons and Dragons, or is it, I don't know, I can't think of an off-the-cuff random thought. But do you know what I mean? What are the things that work for us? And just in the same way that, you know, the way that you do your relationships has to suit you, I think this is the point where that real collaborative working, making relationships with your partners and the other great music makers in your city, this is the fun bit, right? Like, we can look at what that might look like. But yes, certainly music as that mechanism, I think, it transcends those barriers that so often can be there.
Thank you. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but we'd really invite you to have a look at the report and come and chat to us at the break. We'd really love to have a chat to you further about that. And it's over to Julia to wrap up now.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and your attention and your questions and all of this. It's been really, really great to share this with you. Please do pick up a report if you haven't got one. Please do come and talk to us and ask for pictures of cats and dogs. We always like to share that. And as a last thing, the activity that we asked you to think about at the start, and there's a bit of a worksheet on, there's the other side of that worksheet, which is slightly tongue-in-cheek, and apologies to the teachers amongst you, because we're going to ask you to mark yourself. We're going to give you some marking to do. But it's to look at those attributes that you admired in that trusted adult, in that teacher, in that person in your life who made that transformative difference, and to think, how am I doing in that area? How am I embodying those skill sets and those attributes in myself? And how would I like to be? And leave yourself space and perhaps an example about how you might do that going forward. Because I appreciate, as the question kind of alluded to, that it can be quite daunting. So what's just this one first action that we could do to put relationship-centered practice into our day-to-day life? What are the behaviors that you would like to unlock in yourself, or that you would like to unlock in your team to facilitate genuinely working beyond Youth Voice? Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day. Drive safe in the snow. Thank you again.